everybody, this is John Wood. Welcome back. Today I'm going to do for you a video, and this one features the original dressing of the fly known as the Stimulator. Now this is a dressing that was designed back in 1980 by a man named Jim Slattery. It's quite a bit different from the one that you know as the Stimulator, which was popularized by Randall Kaufman. If you want to find out the story on this, check out the spring 2022 issue of Fly Tyer Magazine. The fly is featured in there with Jim's story about how he designed the fly. So let's get started. So I am starting with a Daiichi 1270. You can also use the Tiemco R200, anywhere from a size 12 up to a size 2. This is a size 6, and I'm going to start, I've already marked the middle of the shank, and the middle being the halfway point between the back end of the barb and the rear of the eye of the hook. Now Jim, when he first started tying these, wanted to have a little more bend in the hook than this has got. At the time, actually, there was no curved shank hook like this, so he had to bend streamer hooks to get this shape. You can see that's the bent one, the other bent one. You can see the difference in the bend of the hook right here where I've put the bend. Okay, for the thread we're going to use a 6/0 uni in orange, and I'm going to start it right at that halfway mark, just barely in front of the mark, and start the thread. Leave the tag attached. We're going to use that as the rib of the fly, so leave it attached and just wrap a nice even thread base all the way back to where when you pull it down it hangs right at the point on the barb. Okay, now I'm going to spiral this thread forward, and what that's going to do is it's going to create a slightly rough surface. So when we pinch our deer hair down, it's going to stay in place and have less of a tendency to roll. Now you can use super glue, but back in 1980 that was not a thing. So Jim came up with this to keep the hair from sliding. Now right up in front of where I started the thread, I'm going to build a small bump. Then I'm going to lay a slight, about 1/8 of an inch of thread base right there, just so I'll have a place to tie down the abdomen hackle when we get there. So now I've got my thread hanging right behind that little thread bump, which is right at the halfway point between the point of the barb and the back of the eye. Now for the body, this fly uses deer hair for flotation. These fish that Jim was fishing for on this river in New Jersey, I'm not going to attempt to try to say it without it written in front of me. These fish were very, very picky and would run from the oil slick created by the floatants of the time. So he had to come up with a way to imitate this ovipositing stonefly and a way to keep it on the surface of the water without creating an oil slick. Now I've got a clump of deer hair here, and I've already cleaned it. Didn't think you needed to see that. But I'm going for a clump that's about as big around as this brush here, which is about the same size as a number 2 pencil. if you remember those from your school days. Now I want the tail, it's going to protrude beyond the hair. I want that to be about the length of the hook gap. So what I'm going to do is pinch that, and the markings on this hair are pretty darn close to what I want for this hook. So I'm just going to push that down onto the hook, hold it there, grab this here, and then I've got to reposition my grip. All of that trying not to uneven the tips of the hair very much. So now I've got quite a bit of thread out here, and I'm going to take 2 loose wraps right where that thread was hanging, pinch the hair, roll it towards me, and then take all of the flare or the diameter out of it by pinching it down, and then just make several wraps as tight as you can get it with this 6/0 uni thread. Just run it through those butts, and that's going to lock that down on the thread base that we created. Now I want to trim this, swing my little hairline waste bucket around here, so at least some of the hair is contained as I cut it off. If you haven't seen one of these before, check them out. It's only about 10 bucks from Hairline, and it's a great way to contain the waste while you're tying. Especially in a situation like this, I don't have to worry about hair going everywhere, getting all over the floor. I'm the guy that vacuums around our house, and I don't like to have to chase that hair any further than I have to. So now I've got these butts all trimmed in. Again, being real careful not to cut into my thread. And they're trimmed down, and that should end up right about, which it did, the end of where that short little thread base in front of the bump was located. That worked out just about right on that. So now what I'm going to do is get my, I want to get that one butt out of there. There we go. Folded back on me. Any strays that you find when you're getting started, go ahead and clip them off now. It doesn't have to be super pretty because we're going to cover the whole thing with dubbing in just a little bit. Now, I want to roll my tip of my bobbin up pretty close. I don't want a whole lot of thread out because I'm going to divide this into 3 links. If I got too much out there, it gets in the way. So there's one, and then give it some tight wraps. Again, that's pushing that down onto that spiral that we created with the thread base. There's 2, very tight, and 3. Now you can see I've created 3 pretty good size air pockets. Those are going to hold air. They're going to keep this fly floating, keep it up on top. Now I'm going to take this dubbing here, and this is a mixture of 3 parts light olive hairline rabbit dub, 1 part I think it's Wapsie pink Sal Scud dubbing, and 1 part orange Sal Scud dubbing. The reason I use the Sal Scud is because it's got some flash in it. Jim's original recipe used seal fur, which we can't get anymore in the US. in most cases. There are some places you can get it, but I'm not sure of the exact legalities of that, since the killing of the seals has been outlawed. The rabbit dubbing gives you great grab and allows you to twist this really super tight. Now, as I wrap that, I want to fill these gaps here and kind of start out by kind of compressing that tail, and then fill that gap there, go over that bulbous area of the deer hair without compressing it too much, and then get back down into the next gap. And this takes about, I don't know, on this size, probably about 7 or 8 inches of dubbing total. So it's a process. It's quite a process. And I'm trying to get it as even as possible. It's not going to be perfect on a dubbing noodle that's this long, but I don't want it to be all wonky either. So we're just taking our time. I'm getting my dubbing out of my handy dandy little dubbing dispenser that I made from a plastic hook box by drilling a hole in the top, deburr it real good. This is a fire hole hook box. And then you just fill it with dubbing, pull it out as you need it. It works really, really well, like your big multiple color dubbing dispensers. See, again, I'm making multiple wraps through that gap where I compress the hair down to lock it onto the shank. Again, we need that because that's the buoyancy for the flotation of this fly. Once it gets wet, you want that air in there so it'll hold it up on top. In conjunction with the hackle that we're going to put on here, the flotation created by the hair makes for a very high floating fly. I want just a little bit more right here, just to finish this off. And I always want my dubbing to connect to the prior bit of dubbing that I put on there. That's why I unwound that, to get this last little bit on there. I want it all to be connected, no bare thread in there. Okay, so here we are. Now, remember we had our thread bump, and it's about right here. And then this is the base for tying on our hackle. So I've got let me check my time here, because I've got a time limit with my camera. We're good. So this is the number 12, or about a size 12, neck hackle. Grizzly, because we like the color. Again, we're trying to imitate a fly that's hovering on the water. There's a lot of movement. Now I want this hackle, when it's set on the fly, to be not quite your standard 1.5 times the hook gap. So that's why I've gone down about 3 sizes on this to the number 12 as opposed to a number 6. And I've stripped it to the length that I want. Now I'm going to nip off a few barbs on either side. Hopefully you can see that. And then clip the stem right below where I've cut the barbs. What that's going to do, when I put the thread in there to lock this in, it's going to grab those little butts of those barbs and hold that hackle very tightly. Now I'm going to build a little taper right here, which we'll use later on and come back up to the tie-in point. Okay, now you can see I can tug on that pretty good. we're going to wrap this and try to get as many wraps as possible. Get my hackle pliers here. I really like these rotary hackle pliers. They are my preferred hackle pliers. Alright, now as I bring that back around on the last wrap, I'm going to take this thread tag, which we kept attached, and bring it over the end of that hackle, and then wrap this kind of like we would on a woolly burger when you palm her back and rib forward. That's exactly what we're doing, and I'm just going to work this through here, try to keep as much of that hackle from being compressed as possible. Work this right up here, and I could have left that tag a little bit longer. Thread's cheap. Don't make it more difficult than it has to be, like I've just done. And when I get up here to the front, I'm going to have to get that in my hackle pliers to finish it off. There we go. Try not to catch that hackle. I want to make a full wrap around there and then come back here with my tying thread and lock that rib in completely. And now, that is the back half of our fly. At this point, what I want to do is build a tapered thread base, and this is going to be for our wing. And I'm not going to go quite the diameter of the abdomen because we want that abdomen and the hackle there to help flare our wing. And I'm bringing that all the way to right behind the eye of the hook. Then I'm going to spiral it backwards all the way to the very back end of that tapered thread base, and then spiral it forward to right about a half an eye length behind the eye of the hook. So now for the second half of our fly, we're going to build the wing, the thorax, and the head. Now the proportions on this are considerably different from the more popular stimulator, in that this proportion is, instead of 2/3 abdomen, 1/3 thorax, and no head, this is 1/2 of the body is the thorax. 1/2 of the body is the abdomen. 1/4 is the thorax, or just over 1/4, and just less than 1/4 is the head. If you pick up a stonefly and look at it from the bottom, you'll see that the head on that is a very prominent feature, and that was something that Jim wanted to emphasize, because when you picked up these stoneflies and look at them, you can really see that head. Alright, now what I'm using here for the wing, because we want it to be really spread out, is a super prime winter deer hair, and the tips are very uneven on this thing. The length is quite different. Now normally what you would do when you even deer hair, you would even it up so the tips are all perfectly straight and even. But in this case, what we're going to do is I'm going to flip that process around, because I want this wing to look, sorry about that, I want this wing to be very translucent looking, especially when you look at it from the back. If you have your deer hair tips all even, it's going to be more of an opaque view. Now I've got that so that the butts are even, and our tips are very much uneven. Now this deer hair is slightly bleached, and I'm using this for this video because I want you to be able to see the hair and exactly what it does a little bit better. So I'm going to lay that so the bulk of the ends of the hair are half to full length of the tail itself beyond the end of the tail. So I get that positioned, and I'm trying to keep this hair up on top, so keep that in mind as we move forward. And this is a pretty big clump. It's slightly bigger than the clump that we used on the abdomen and tail. Right, so again I'm going to make 2 loose loops, and then as I tighten it and compress the bulk out of that hair, I'm turning it towards me and we'll rock it back and forth a little bit and then get it tighter and tighter and tighter with each successive wrap. And I'm not going forward or backward, I'm going right over the same wraps. And as that hair flares back, it's going to lock a bunch of them in there and really lock that body down. Again, I'm going to swing my bucket forward, pull out a little more thread so it stays there, and trim this head back and try not to cut my thread. Now this hair, because it's a little stiffer, because it's been bleached, is going to want to try to spin a little bit more than an unbleached deer hair would, so bear with me as I make a few extra wraps. I've got to get this all cut down here. Now, alright, again, I don't want it going anywhere, so I'm gonna really cinch down on that. Okay, now we're going to do the same segmentation technique, only this time we're going to cut it in half. And I want half to be from the back of the eye of the hook, which you'll see in a minute a little bit better when I trim that with a razor, and the front of the hackle that's poking through there. So we're going to split that in half. It's going to be about right there. Let's see if I can do that. I'm going to take a wrap like that. Again, take our second wrap. I'm a little further back than I want to be. Let me adjust that. Take our second wrap, pull up while rotating that back towards you. That counteracts the torque of the thread. There we go. And then on this one, I want to split that hair so that there's not going to be any on the bottom. The reason for that is because I want the wings going straight out from the sides, maybe a little bit downward, but I don't want it to be a full collar all the way around the fly, if you will. So I'm going to pull those hairs up and back, right? And then make our loop. There we go. Press that down, really wrap it down. I want to look over here and make sure my wings are where it's at, where I want it. There we go. I'm going to get just a couple more wraps. Okay, on this hackle, we're going to go ahead and put it in before because we don't have anything to rib it with to hold it in place. Now, because this fly is intended to ride at an extreme angle, imitating the adult stonefly dropping eggs on the water, we want this hackle right here to be really long. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you that. There we go. That's a little bit long. Let me work my way back here a little bit. And that's about what I'm looking for. So I'm going to cut this here. And then I'm going to do the same process where I trim the barbs off of the stem. I did that into my little bucket. You can see what I've got there. And I've left it long enough so that once I tie it in and bend that butt forward, I'll be able to lock it down all the way up to the next segment wrap. And that's going to make sure that that doesn't come out when you're fishing it. So just kind of work all that hair back. And I'll tie that in right where I had snipped off those hackle barbs. Come on. And then I want it facing backwards. I want the bottom, let me rephrase that. I want the bottom of that feather facing backwards so that when we wrap it, it's going to cup towards the back of the fly. And that's going to help to hold that fly up on top of the water. Now, for this section of dubbing, I'm going to use the same dubbing I used on the abdomen. Again, it's a 3 parts light olive rabbit dubbing and 1 part pink sow scud dubbing with some flash in it, 1 part orange sow scud dubbing with a little bit of flash in it. And we're going to do the same thing, wrap it nice and tight. Make sure I don't get anything caught in there. And then we've got to fill this gap right here. Oop, move my vise a bit. There we go. Fill that gap and then just start working our way forward. We don't want our wraps too tight because we don't want them compressing the bulk of that deer hair, which is going to help us float once the dubbing gets wet. And I just wrap that on there nice and tight. There we go. I'm going to need just a little bit more. Need a hair right in there to get that going. That should be enough. If not, we'll add some more. And then get up into here into this gap, and it is not enough. You notice I'm not over adding dubbing onto the thread because I don't want to fight it off. Because once you get it wrapped around this pre-waxed thread, it really wants to stick. You have a hard time fighting it off, and then you'll end up sometimes nicking the thread and weakening it. There we go. Now I'm right in that gap, in that little indentation that we created by compressing the hair down onto the hook shank. Now I'm going to take my hackle and I want to make 2 full wraps right here at the beginning. Then start palmering it forward. And I want to end it as I come around on that 4th wrap after leaving the abdomen. Now where that hair is really compressed, and you put some tension on that thread, it's going to slide it down into that indentation. Carefully nip that off. Now the very last step is to add the head. And for this one, I'm using a mix of 50% pink sow scud and 50% orange sow scud dubbing. And it makes for an interesting color that is the original color that Jim was going for when he was matching the big eastern stoneflies present on the river he was fishing. Now, I told you I was going to trim that head a little bit more, and I forgot. So let's do it now. I'm going to use a razor blade, and I go to the back of the eye and then up. And that's one of the reasons I stayed back away from the eye whenever I was bringing the thread forward. Now, you'll notice something different as we proceed. If you've looked at the article in Fly Tyer Magazine, I got all clever and decided that I should wrap this head with thread wraps, which Jim does not, and I found out why at a later date. Putting that slick thread base on there made it very, very difficult to get this dubbing to stay in place where it drops off the front of the head. So you can see that's pretty rough. I want it right up against that hackle, and that's not nearly as smooth as I want it. So I'm going to compress it down a little bit more. That'll do it. There we go. Now we're getting it. Now we're cooking with gas, baby. A little more. Getting deer hair on my lips. That stuff flies everywhere. Here we go. Oop. Yeah. Getting that hackle caught in that dubbing. And the dubbing is a little thick right there. So compress and pull, compress and pull. And get it slide down. I need just a little bit right there. And that should be enough to complete the head of this original dressing stimulator. Now I got too much on there. And this is the thing I didn't want to fight. So I'm going to spread it down the thread a little bit. There we go. I don't like that. So I'm going to add just a little more dubbing. That last bit of dubbing kind of slid down around the eye, down to the eye of the hook. So when I add this and put it back behind it, it'll hold it in place a little better. There we go. That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to build the head, the tie-off head. I'm going to give her a little whip finish. All right. And that is Jim Slattery's original dressing stimulator. If you want to hear the whole story, check out the 2022 spring issue of Fly Tyer Magazine. It's got all the poop on how he designed it and what this fly is supposed to imitate. Like I said, I used a bleach hair here so you could see the difference. And this is a sample fly that Jim tied for me. And hope you can see that. And how it's supposed to imitate the ovipositing stonefly. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you again next time.